Have news coming up on the big one, 700 WLW, and then atheists want to congratulate themselves, applaud themselves, pat themselves on the back, and want to proclaim from high atop the mountain that God loves atheists more than Christians, at least in northern Kentucky. Scott Sloan, home of the best Bengals coverage, 700 WLW Cincinnati. Scott Sloan Show, back on a big one, 700 WLW. All right, so the contentious nature of the Noah's Ark. So they're building this Noah's Ark theme park in northern Kentucky, in Louisville. And this thing is massive, right? They've been building this thing for 4 years. Now, the debate has gone back and forth. Answers in Genesis and their group we had on the show last week said, look, it's pretty clear that other religious groups can function within the laws that are prescribed by the Commonwealth of Kentucky as to separating church and state. So we get the separation here. Here's what happens. You buy a ticket to see Noah's Ark, and 25% of that ticket and the taxes that we paid get kicked back to us in a revenue break. Okay, so the idea is you buy a ticket, you know what you're going to see, that money comes back to us in the form of a rebate because allegedly we're going to do a ton of business and it's good for the state of Kentucky, and all that money is going to fund some programs. Well, the debate is waged whether or not that group specifically is abiding by federal law relative to requirements, employment requirements, that you believe in God, which of course is no, that you can't do that. The board itself, the people making the decisions as to whether or not the tax rebates will be given to the Answers in Genesis people, goes through the tourism department, and the tourism department now says that Answers in Genesis is ineligible for tax incentives because those employees are going to be screened on the basis of religion. The people who have been fighting about this, I guess, against that break this whole time has been the atheists, and from the American Atheist, Aron on the show this morning on 700 WLW. Aron, is this a victory? Is this victory proof that God is on the side of atheists?
I've had a lot of friends that believe in God that have told me something along those lines, that it does seem like God is smiling on us if there were such a thing, yes.
So you get the irony. This battle, it's been going on for 4 years, right? They started building this thing, and the Commonwealth of Kentucky says, all right, when you sell a ticket, for whatever that's going to be, the taxes that you pay on that, 25% of that, I don't know what monetary amount that is, maybe you know, but it'll come back to you in the form of a rebate, which a lot of businesses, let's face it, enjoy that. Why is it unfair for this group, and yet others get that kind of a break?
Well, I think the issue was that there's discrimination in the hiring process. They're discriminating both on religious grounds, and then they're also discriminating on grounds of sexual orientation.
Okay, and they rule that on what? Is there a specific law involved here that denies Answers in Genesis the right to hire people who can sign a statement of belief? And then, if you look at the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it gives religious groups a hiring exception from discrimination laws. And in that specificity with the 64 Civil Rights Act, how does it apply here?
Well, there's a lot of contradictions in the way that churches are run when they're supposed to be non-profit organizations, but also running for-profit businesses, and that's part of the issue right there.
Right. Some would call it a loophole, which is pretty common in politics.
Okay, you can call it that.
Right. So in this case, how's the Civil Rights Act not applying in their case?
How does the Civil Rights Act not apply to Answers in Genesis?
Yes.
I don't know how it does not apply.
Well, what you're saying is, in the 1964 Civil Rights Act says they carve out an exemption for religious groups and a hiring exemption from discrimination and freedom of association. It's a battle of freedom of association versus the separation of church and state and constitutional rights. If that's the case, how doesn't that apply then? Obviously, that's what this panel ruled in Kentucky, and I'm sure it's going to be kicked up to a higher court, for sure, and on appeal. But you're saying, okay, this is the right decision, but if I look at the Civil Rights Act of 64, it's pretty clear. It says religious groups can put this exemption in there.
Well, yeah, if it's exclusively a religious group, but then we're talking about a for-profit business, aren't we?
We are.
So we're not specifically talking about a religious group. We're talking about something that blurs that line. So we now have a for-profit business under the guise of a non-profit organization.
Mm-hmm. Which they're making it. Now, in this case, here's the way I look at it, because you know more about this than I do, to be sure. is that if I'm a business, I pay my sales tax, and that's what we're talking about here, the tax. Now, I get 25% of that back. Is the argument also in the fact that people who would buy that ticket essentially say, hey, listen, we know we're going to see something that sides with the Bible, the biblical argument of creation, and can the argument that how would someone with that kind of sense go in knowingly buying a ticket object to their tax money being rebated to the people of the ownership of the item you're going to see?
So the money that is supposed to be paid in tax,
yes,
you're saying that this 25% actually goes back to the for-profit organization.
They get a rebate, right?
Right. So the for-profit organization doesn't actually pay the tax. It's rebated back to them. Yeah. And then because this is all going to be done in stages, that money then actually goes back into the construction of the art project.
Or whatever it is, because but the money is coming directly from a sales tax. In order to get that generate a sales tax, one must purchase a good or service. In this case, they're going to see something that that argues that life on Earth and argues the creation standpoint. So, if that's where the money's coming from, aren't you already by de facto buying that ticket to some degree agreeing with that? You know what I'm saying? Well, it's not like it's people who are going are exposing themselves deliberately to that, and now you're taking some of that money and giving it back to the people who got it. I know it's so convoluted I can't even follow it, but essentially that's the gist of what's going on here. How can that be objectionable?
Because it's not just an amusement park anymore. You're not buying a ticket to go see some thing like what you would see at Disney World or something. It's not a tribute to a big mouse. Okay, this is something where you're paying money for an amusement park purposes, but it is also being blended with the church. So now it's for proselytizing, it's for religious evangelism or what have you. So,
but aren't you getting that when you buy a ticket to the park, though? I mean, you're exposed to that the minute you buy your ticket.
Are you purchasing a ticket for a for-profit amusement park, or are you purchasing a ticket for a non-profit church?
Does it matter in the sense that you're buying a ticket and you walk in and go, okay, I'm already submitting myself to something I might find objectionable?
No, the issue is if it's going to be for a for-profit organization where that 25% doesn't actually get paid in tax, but gets refunded back, then it's going to be completing the art project because it's going to be done in stages, so that money actually goes back into the project itself, and then there's a discrimination in the hiring process. So you can't have both. It can't be running as a nonprofit where you get the right to discriminate, and then as a for-profit organization where you don't have the right to discriminate against people that don't believe that same thing or that have a different sexual orientation.
Aron Ra with American Atheists on the show, and talking about the fact that the Commonwealth of Kentucky has now taken away those tax incentives for the Noah's Ark exhibit and Answers in Genesis. That's what we're talking about this morning on the show on 700 WLW. Is there a sense of irony here, too, though, that is now, I'm sure this thing isn't settled here either, Aron, the irony that the tax money generated will go to fund things that the church themselves disagree with?
How would the tax money go to fund things the church disagrees with? I don't understand.
Well, they would
fund it back to the church.
Well, no, what you're saying is that money that they're not getting back, when they pay sales tax, again, they're not getting all the money back. The sales tax will be levied on this business. The government then takes it and spends it on things that the people who are paying the tax may find objectionable to. At the heart of it, isn't that the argument?
I don't see where this argument is that you're talking about. How is the tax money?
Well, if we're objecting to the fact that a for-profit, in this case, although they're arguing it's not a for-profit business in proselytizing, that separation of church and state, that wall exists, and that we're taking tax money for the people and giving it back to a group who's discriminating. If I'm the church and now you take the bulk of that tax money and you distribute it to different government programs and the like that I disagree with, is there a sense of irony there? I think there is.
Well, there's a couple of issues here. One, you're talking about tax money going to a church, which, I mean, the Founding Fathers argued against them should never be tax money to be used to support a church. That's the first problem.
Okay.
And then when you're talking about money being used for something that the people that are paying the taxes object to, well, I don't understand what you're talking about there. What's this tax money being used for? What they object to?
There could be birth control could be one of them. There's a whole host of issues there that I'm sure as a taxpayer that we fund things all the time that we object to. But that is the nature of taxes. And if you turn it the other way, obviously it doesn't apply in your book. We have a contradiction there, don't we?
No, we don't. The state is not supposed to provide tax money to support a church, period.
Right. But if I pay taxes, do I have a reasonable objection to say how my tax dollars should be spent?
I don't understand where the objection is.
The objection is, if the state takes my money and does something with it of which I object, I don't have a say in that. However, the opposite is true in your argument.
How so?
I think I just explained that.
Well, no. You've said that something objectionable might happen with the tax money, and then you implied something about birth control. Well, people need birth control, so I don't understand.
But if my church objects with that, you are now taking that sales money that my business has generated and spending on something that I, at heart, don't agree with. And you're saying it applies to me when I buy a ticket, but when that tax money is generated, all of a sudden my objections don't matter.
No, your objections don't matter in this case, no.
Correct, that's what I'm saying. So you agree that there's some sense of contradiction and irony there.
No, there's no contradiction.
Absolutely there is.
There's no contradiction. You haven't been able to explain whether there's a contradiction.
I have. You're just not understanding. Aron with American Atheists on the show. One other thing, too, here. As far as this seems to get a lot of attention this time of year specifically, is it because it is the high holy Christian holiday, or is it just because the Christian community tends to be a lot more visible this time of year because of the birth of Christ and all that? And some people will say, hey, look, why do you guys pick this fight this time of year? Is this something you brought on? And why now this time of year, or is it just simply because of the time of the season?
If you're talking about the war on Christmas, that was manufactured entirely by the Christian right. There is no war on Christmas otherwise. And it has nothing to do with the birth of Christ, as of course, because, first of all, I don't think there ever was such a person. But if there was, it wasn't born on that date. And every aspect of this holiday was taken from other religious traditions that are older than that. And that's all of your Christmas tree, your Yule log, all of this come from other sources. So it's kind of absurd to even call it Christmas.
Right.
And the atheist community, by and large, doesn't care what you call it or what you want to attribute it to. It's a holiday that's shared by everybody for different reasons. They don't recognize the same sorts of things that you want to add into it. But that doesn't mean you own the holiday. It doesn't mean that it's original or unique to Christianity.
And I get the pagan elements that have, I wouldn't say it's wholly American because it's happened elsewhere around the world, but we have a tendency to do those things and, debase a culture or a belief system or whatever it might be into something, rather simple that becomes an amalgamation of a whole bunch of other things. And I think in this case, Christmas is one of those. But, for example, a couple of weeks ago, we had a guy on, an atheist. I don't know if it's your group or another one. They're putting billboards up, essentially with a little kid on there writing a letter to Santa that essentially exposes what you will say the myth of Santa and Jesus. And, from that point, I found that offensive because, and I think a lot of people do too. I have friends that are atheists. I don't have a problem with it myself. However, if you're going to pick that battle, why pick it during the Christmas season? It's kind of, if you don't want to engage in a fight and say, hey, we don't care either way, it sounds like a lot of atheists do. Maybe not you, but certainly there are atheists out there, namely the people who put the billboard up.
Well, yes, there are. And we're tired of the society being misled the way it is. When you think
and why pick the battle during the most holy time of the year, obviously? Is that because you have Christians' attention? It just seems to me there's no upside in picking a fight over the baby Jesus this time of year.
I didn't put up the billboards, but I understand why they went up, and I'm sure why they put them up in the holiday season, because this is where, as I said, the Christian right have wanted to create a war on Christmas, and we're just taking our part to resist that.
Well, it seems like you're engaging in a fight you say doesn't exist. I mean, isn't this proof there's a war on Christmas? If atheists are putting billboards up that say Jesus is a myth?
No, we're just taking advantage of the fact that there's more in common. Jesus has more in common with Santa Claus than he does with Caesar.
Okay, but if you're trying to get people who may be on the fence or dabbling in atheism or questioning the existence of God, which is
dabbling in atheism?
Yeah, dabbling at what you've never had. What you mean to tell me there's never been an atheist who says, you know what, I think there is a higher being? Of course there have.
How is that dabbling in atheism?
Well, that's dabbling. It's like dabbling in veganism. My daughter was a vegan for about 6 months and decided it wasn't for her. That would be dabbling, Aaron.
Okay.
What you're saying is what? Once you become an atheist, there's no going back? Is that what? That's not very open-minded, the open-minded guy you allege to be.
Well, that's also not at all what I said. I said I didn't understand the term dabbling as it applies to atheism. I said
dabbling in atheism. There are people who would, and I'm sure there's people dabbling in Christianity, too.
Yeah, but dabbling also means practicing. And there's nothing to practice here. I mean, from some aspect of atheism, I would say maybe you could practice it, because in the application of atheism, from my perspective, is the application of science and skepticism. Yeah. So, sure, okay. So we'll take the word dabbling to apply to scientific skepticism.
Okay, and there are people that may do that, but again, if you're trying to, I don't want to say recruit, that's probably a bad word here, but if you're trying to encourage people to think for themselves, be a free thinker that you allege you are, why pick a battle that's a time of year that would be so polarizing?
Because it's a perfect example. As I said, Jesus has a lot more to do, a lot more in common with Santa Claus than any historical figure. They are essentially the same thing.
Right, but just by bringing this argument up right at this time of year, you realize you're going to alienate a lot of people. That's my point.
Right,
I mean, from a PR move, it's not a very good move.
How are we alienating people?
Well, because people are going to go, what do you mean? You're telling kids there's no Santa, there's no Jesus, and they're going to tune you out. That's what people do.
Yeah, well, I realize that adults react to hearing that there's no God exactly the same way children react to hearing that there's no Santa Claus. It's unfortunate, but then a lot of us wouldn't tell our kids that there was a Santa Claus anyway, because there's no purpose in lying to children. Well, there's no benefit to that.
Of course there is a benefit in lying to children.
What benefit is there in lying to children?
Well, for example, my kid's nagging me. I got to go. We're going to go to Disney. We go to Disney. We need to go to Disney. Dad, you can take us to fine. Let's get in the car. We'll drive to Disney. I drive to downtown Cincinnati. I find an abandoned building. And I go, oh, it's closed. And that ends the argument. What's wrong with that?
You just lied to your kids?
Who knows?
What do you mean, who knows?
The kid doesn't know.
So it's okay to lie to somebody if they don't realize they've been lied to?
Correct.
That explains so much.
Yes, it does. Hey, thanks for joining me. Aaron, Jennifer, Bethel, you're on the show. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? Merry Christmas. What's up?
Merry Christmas. I just want to say thank you for getting that idiot off the radio, because I believe in Jesus Christ. My 2-year-old sits there and asks me to pray for her at night and says she loves Jesus. And
that's the problem I have, and maybe he didn't get it because he lives in an ultra-dry world where there is no gray area, but how is it helping atheists if you put a billboard up that tells your kid there's no God, there's no Santa Claus? It's going to make people less likely to be open and receptive to your message if the idea is about recruiting and exposing people to atheism, which I don't have a problem with. But when you start doing it in attacking my beliefs or my kids' beliefs, and I think most people have a problem with it.
Exactly, because I'm 29 years old, and my parents, we all believe, we're Catholics, and we didn't have much when we were Christmas, but it was all about family, and Jesus. And Jesus, the 3 wise men only got 3 presents. But, I think people blow Christmas out of proportion. I think it should be all about family and Jesus.
Yeah, it's not a contest to see how much you can buy, but of course, as I said, it's America. We take everything that's good in the world, culturally, religiously, whatever. We do something that's awesome as Americans, right? We simply denigrate it, and I don't mean that in a bad sense.